Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're talking to Mark Mercer. He's been on the show previously, and he's currently running for Secretary of State. Mark, welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, Secretary of State, this is not something that, like, a lot of people may not know what a Secretary of State does. And so let's start there, and then we can move into why you want to do this thing.
Okay. The Secretary of State, we could have a great conversation that they are the keeper of the state seal. But I don't think that would be a very exciting half hour, do you?
State seal would probably mean we'd have less guests or less conscious guests.
We could talk about that the head of the State Historical Society, or that they do the state archives or run the numbering of the bills.
It's still not probably very interesting, although it is interesting that, you know, in California we can present a bill that's just a name with a blank piece of paper. It can be approved and sent through. I mean, that may be a topic of conversation.
But the two main things that they are known for is they register businesses and they're the chief election officer of the state.
Yeah, and so I know a lot of the people that I've talked to over the time that having run for office and those scenarios where voting is actually involved, the cleanliness of the voter rolls, election process, making sure that people's votes actually count, that starts to get interesting for people, because otherwise they feel like if their voice isn't heard, why bother voting?
Exactly. That I could tell you story after story after story of people who have come and shared, you know, examples. And an example would be like George in Temecula. First time voting in California, he showed up at the polls and somebody had already showed up, signed his name, and cast a ballot under his name.
That's a problem.
That is a problem. Or I could tell you...
Did they vote how he would have voted? Or obviously,
he'll never know.
Yeah.
But, you know, his vote got through the machine. He was allowed to vote provisionally, but when they looked at it, you know, hey, somebody had already voted, so his vote would not have counted.
Right. And so his vote is then denigrated to a provisional versus actually one that should have just slid into place and counted with his actual opinions.
Exactly.
But I've heard voter fraud doesn't exist.
Well, it doesn't exist if you don't prosecute it and if you don't audit and you don't inspect for it, like our current Secretary of State. Our current Secretary of State is taking the position that we're not going to look for it, we're not going to investigate it, and we're sure not going to prosecute it.
Well, and this is interesting because, you know, people would assume it's California, previously one of the top 10, and maybe still one of the top 10 economies in the world, but, you know, it's sliding backwards. We must have a great voting system. We must have unified voter rolls. We must have great communication across the state. Are any of these issues or myths?
A lot of myths there. Let's start with worldwide 28 Western democracies. United States is dead last when it comes to election integrity. Now, when you go across all 50 states in the Union, as measured by a liberal think tank, not a conservative, a liberal think tank, across 14 different categories of election, from provisionals to the military ballots, you know, down the line, all the very aspects, California is ranked number 2 from the bottom.
Right.
So we have some major problems in the state of California. Of the, you know, back during the Bush administration, there was a new law that passed that required every state to have a centralized voter database. California is the last state to implement it, and it's just a thing on the piece of paper. It hasn't fully been even implemented yet.
Right. So this is California. We have Silicon Valley. We're known for technology. We've got database companies, some of the largest in the world, here in the Bay Area, and you're saying we can't have a unified database for our voter rolls. Let's talk about what that really means. Because,
yes.
Okay, great, everyone's name's in there. But we have how many counties?
58.
Okay, so we have 58 counties in California. Not having a unified voter database means that we have 58 different ones.
Yeah, and we are in the process of creating one unified database, but we're the last state in the union to even get there. But
tell us what that means. I mean, because there are ramifications to that.
Yes. So let's say your grandmother lived in LA County.
Right.
And she then moves up to Contra Costa County.
Right.
And
let's give her an even more complex situation. She now owns property as well in San Joaquin County.
Oh, well, yeah. And she could be registered in all three. And if the counties are not exchanging data, that person could literally vote in all three. Or what's even worse is, let's say there's a close election down in Los Angeles County, and there's some special interest who knows that the election is going to be very close. And they know that your grandmother now lives up in Contra Costa, and she's most likely not going to vote in Los Angeles. They can, like what happened to George in Temecula, somebody could go in and say, you know, I'm Mrs. Pareja, and sign that name and vote for her.
Right.
And they are now what's called a repeater. They voted in multiple precincts or for multiple people.
Right. And
so it creates an opportunity for fraud, whether or not it actually happens.
So the opportunity for fraud is there, but then also maybe grandma doesn't even know that she's not voting legally if she says, well, since I own property in those places, I also need to vote absentee in those two places because my interests are not being represented unless I do. She may be running afoul of the law and nobody's going to catch it anyway, even though it's best of intentions, it's still illegal. It's still illegal, and the thing is, I've had multiple college students brag to me that they have voted in their home state and in their college state, and they think they're allowed to do it, and you know, or they know they're not supposed to do it, and they don't care. They still do it anyways. And that's different states, but to even be able to do it multiple times in the same country and the same state
is a problem.
Now, what if grandma dies and she's got all three of those available?
Well, there recently was a prosecution that started up in Sacramento,
right,
where a Mexican citizen stole an ID from a dead man 25 years ago.
Okay.
And has been voting for him for 25 years. There's a story in Ventura County where a father voted for his dead son for many years.
Right.
I recently heard a story of a woman in Los Angeles County who, for 10 years, they've been trying to get their aunt removed from the voter rolls. And the county register won't remove them from the voter rolls, even though they have a death certificate, because she's been faithfully voting for the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, you know, you don't want to deprive anyone of their vote. And maybe if they had the dead person sign a letter saying that they're dead, maybe that could have helped.
I don't know what sometimes government is too smart for itself.
Yeah, indeed. And, you know, what's interesting is, you know, having been a candidate and we get the voter rolls and we have certain information about them so that we can slice and dice, right?
Yeah.
It's remarkable to me how many 110-year-olds you can get in a specific block area.
There were 10,000 in the state of California, 4,000 of which have voted in 2016.
Yeah, so you can, so the 110-year-old vote is, you know, solid. Still.
Pretty solid stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is almost, you would think, laughable, but this is real life in California. What would you do if you were put in the office of the keeper of the seal and all of these other things? I mean, what's on your agenda?
Well,
why bother?
Most people don't realize that the Secretary of State is the chief election officer of the state. And one of their responsibilities is to audit, inspect, and prosecute election law violations. Right. People are going to be much more likely to participate in the election system if they feel that their vote actually matters.
Right.
When people hear stories, like a young lady I talked to the other day up in Sacramento, where she went to the polls to vote and looked at the name right above, and it was her father-in-law. And he had already voted. Not bad, except he'd been dead for 5 years.
Right.
And she says, I only wish if he came all the way down here from heaven to vote that he would at least stop by for dinner.
Something. Visit, hello, text, something.
But I mean, let's just think about it. You know, over in Alameda County, a man lost his wife in like June of 2016. He actually took a copy of his death certificate into the county registers. But in October, a absentee ballot showed up in the mail.
Right.
Now, let's just forget anything about the possibility of fraud, whether or not somebody votes or doesn't vote, and let's forget all those arguments.
Right.
How insensitive is our government being by reminding, by opening up fresh wounds? This couple had voted together for 40 years. They knew, this was an important part of their life. And now all of a sudden this absentee ballot shows up in the mail with his wife's name on it, something that he's tried to do. It's going to open up, a wound. It's very insensitive of the government not to clean up their voter rolls. Now, number two, there's a good government policy behind it because it costs us taxpayers about $4 per voter to send voter voting material.
Excuse me.
But then there's a good, you got the emotional aspect, you got the good government aspect of it, but then you also have election fraud because we live in America. We live in a republic where we believe one person, one vote. A dead person should not be voting.
Right.
So if you remove them from the rolls, you prevent somebody from unintentionally or intentionally getting to cast more ballots than they should be entitled to do it. And when somebody casts a ballot that they're not authorized to cast, what does that mean? It dilutes the value of the vote of everybody else. Instead of we the people in these close elections telling our government what we want our government to do, now you get special interests buying these close races and them telling we the people what kind of government we're going to get.
So Mark, okay, we've talked a lot about dead people, but are there other kinds of scenarios? I mean, I've heard stories of school buses pulling up with large groups of people and they go through and they can go ahead and vote on behalf of large groups of others, like at 4 o'clock before the polls close, the bus pulls up. Is there anything that can be done about those kinds of processes, or are there ways that people could potentially let the Secretary of State know that there is a potential issue, and then would you have any ability to persecute that kind of thing or prosecute that kind of thing?
Yes, I have the ability to audit, inspect, and prosecute. And actually, election officials in the county, if they have the ability to challenge somebody and say, you're not actually the person. That is the fact that that's what the law is in the state of California, that an election official at the county could actually challenge somebody and says, no, you are not the person who you're claiming to be. And I've heard stories of election officials who could speak perfect Spanish, and saw a group of Spanish-speaking individuals walk into the poll, and they literally were pointing at the wall and saying, okay, I'll vote for this person, you vote for this person, you vote for this one, and could hear that they were not those individuals' person. That election official could have actually challenged those people and actually prevented that fraud from happening. But the Secretary of State, who's in charge of training, hasn't told them about these basic laws that are in the books. Right. And I'm not going to just pick on the Hispanic community because it happens, in San Luis Obispo, where a busload of college students show up, and election officials didn't realize that they had the tools, they had the ability to actually challenge this busload of people. They thought that because all they're told is you can't see ID, the law says you can't see ID. They don't realize that as election officials, they actually have an ability to challenge.
So this is interesting because this is something that's come up when I've been involved in conversations about election integrity before. People are shocked to know that they're not supposed to be asked for ID, and that they're actually pushed back from even showing it in some cases if they do pull out their ID. Is that still the case? And is there anything that can be done? What would have to happen to change laws like that to actually require people to have ID to prevent these kinds of scenarios?
Well, it takes a passage of law. It was the law that you had to show ID, and back in 1998, I believe it was removed from the law. Now, in the state of Rhode Island, not necessarily known to be a conservative bastion in this United States, the people started hearing so much fraud that they went to their legislature and they demanded that their legislature give them voter ID. And Rhode Island was one of the first states to, in this recent movement to require voter ID again. And it happened because the people heard fraud. Now, as Secretary of State, if I start prosecuting, if I start auditing and using the bully pulpit to help Californians understand the inadequacies of the security of our ballot here in California. If I start doing that, the people are going to do one of two things. They're either going to demand that their legislatures give them voter ID, or the people are going to do a ballot initiative. And I will be more than willing to help them, because I think of the 28 Western democracies, the United States should not be the most insecure elections. I think, you know, we no longer live in the Jim Crow days where you had literacy tests and poll taxes. That is a bygone age. We need to get into the 21st century. I mean, if Mexico has thumbprints, maybe we don't have to go to thumbprints to vote, but it doesn't hurt us to take a couple additional steps to secure the vote. We live in a republic. It's important that people feel secure, that they are telling their government what to do, not special interests telling us what kind of government we're going to get.
Right. So in Rhode Island, were they racist? Is that why they did it? I mean, that's usually the only argument that can come up, is that we're depriving people who don't have an ID of the ability to vote. But is that even really a viable argument?
No, there was recently a federal court case in the state of Georgia, and they were given like 2 years to find a single person in the state of Georgia who could not get a voter ID or get an alternative form of ID.
Right.
And nobody, the groups had 2 years to try to find one person, and they couldn't even find one person. Now, it may be a couple extra steps that you have to take. You have to go down to a government agency and show them the, you know, proof of citizenship. Have to show them some documents. It may be inconvenient to, you know, maybe you have to go, you know, go back to the hospital that you're born and get a new copy. But, you know, voting is a right, but it's also a duty, and it's a responsibility. You know, if you want to go to the bar and have a drink tonight, you're going to have to show ID.
Right.
Well, if you don't have ID, you're not going to get that drink.
Right.
You have to have taken an affirmative action to get the ID so that you could buy the beer at the bar tonight.
Right.
You're not being racist by saying, yes, you have the right to vote, but you also have a duty and a responsibility to secure your vote. Right. And the vote of everybody else around you. Well,
and doesn't the argument diminish when California even allows non-citizens to get driver's licenses? Is that accurate, or is that inaccurate that we allow that?
That is a law.
Right.
But you know, the thing is, they get their driver's license. They don't have to show proof of citizenship, so they get a different driver's license. That database, that information is very readily available, and we can go, oh, well, somebody accidentally registered to vote who we know didn't show proof of citizenship. We need to remove them from the voter rolls.
Right. And so all of these mechanisms and all of the old arguments seem like they would be defeated, but maybe we need someone who can figure that out. So the question is there, how many others are currently registered to run? And I know that, you know, that can change at a couple of moments' notice.
As of right now, there are 6 people running. I am the only Republican who's running.
Okay. And so help us just summarize what you could actually do about these things, because it's great to know the stats.
Yeah.
But what would you actually do to change the direction? What do you actually have the jurisdiction to do?
Yeah.
Prosecute, great, but what does that mean?
Okay. Right now, LA County has like 144% voter registration.
144%? That's great. That's overachieving.
Yes. State of California has 101% voter registration.
Okay.
That means there's more people registered to vote than are eligible to vote.
Right.
Which means we're not clean from the rolls. Those who are dead, those who are removed, people who have duplicate entries, people who are registered to vote who are not authorized to vote, you know, those 4 main categories.
Right.
What I can do as Secretary of State is, if I determine that any county is not doing the job of following election laws, I actually have the authority to come in and make them obey election laws and clean the voter rolls.
Right.
Also, as Secretary of State, we could talk about entering compacts with other states to share data. This is a great story. Tomorrow there is a Supreme Court decision in Ohio where they're going to, or a Supreme Court decision in D.C. about Ohio and how they clean up the voter rolls. The state of California actually filed a brief, and they said, Ohio, you shouldn't do it the way how you're doing it, but here's all these other things that you could do, most of which California doesn't do. But one of the things that California told Ohio that they could do is join an organization called ERIC, which is a data exchange with various states, so that if somebody moves from Kansas from California, California gets that and cleans that person off the voter roll.
Right.
But California tells Ohio they should do it, but they themselves don't do it.
Right.
California says you should enter a pact with your local states around you, but we don't do it with Nevada or Idaho or Oregon or
Right.
Washington or New York, where there might be traffic.
Right. So, but I mean, just it seems like, and I don't, in case people missed it, obviously, I mean, 101% voter participation means there could have been some issues or whatever, but when you're talking 144% participation.
Not participation, registration.
Registration, 144% more than should be able to vote is what you're saying.
Yes.
That's an obvious sign that there may be fraud occurring in that area, or at least huge opportunities for it.
Huge opportunity.
Are there other, is LA just an isolated incident, or are there other places where?
San Francisco over 120, San Diego over 130. There's 11 counties in the state with over 100% voter registration.
And so define where that overage comes from. What is the qualification for registration? Just, I mean, that they can register.
Yeah.
And then what's that over registration number? What does that represent?
Let's say somebody lived in LA County,
Right.
but they died in Arizona.
Right.
Arizona doesn't send a copy of the death certificate to LA County. If all LA County is doing is cleaning up their voter rolls by people who live in LA County and not comparing it with people who died in the state of California or people who died nationwide or comparing their data with the Social Security death records,
Right.
all these things that they can do, this data is available. They're just choosing to only clean their data based upon a small convenience set. Now, as you do that year after year after year, your voter, no longer do you have 80, 90% voter registration. It now keeps growing and growing and growing.
So that allows people to be nefarious if they want to.
Yes, it create, these people who have died, people who have moved, they're not going to be coming back and voting, and so they're not very likely to complain somebody voted on my behalf, like George. The fact that you have a concerned citizen who knows that their aunt has voted every single year for the last 10 years, even though that she's dead,
Right.
that is not what most people know. I mean, back in 2016, I think it was, CBS ran a story about how there were over 30 people in LA County who had been dead over 20 years, who had been voting for over 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, and that could change your party affiliation, or at least the way you vote, if you are dead and no longer voting for yourself. So I'm sure there are going to be people that have questions. They're going to want to know more about you and your background. Do you have a campaign website they could go to research you more?
www.markmeuser.com. That's MarkMeuser.com. And they can go to follow me on Twitter, which is @MarkMeuser. Again, MarkMeuser. I'm also on Facebook. I'm out there, and you can find out more about the campaign.
As long as they can spell your name, they can find you.
They should be able to
basically.
find me.
Okay, and so if there were 2 or 3 items that you want them to remember about the campaign before you go, those would be?
We live in a republic. In a republic, it is our responsibility as citizens to tell our government what kind of government we want to be governed by. And we have that privilege and responsibility to do so. And so I would tell you, vote.
Right.
Vote. And, take the time to make sure your registration is up to date.
Right.
And then vote for people who are willing to say that the Secretary of State should not be a partisan bickering. That one person, one vote, that I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you're an American citizen, you should have one vote. And that's what I am going to fight for as your Secretary of State, that we return integrity of our California ballots back to the people.
Okay. Thanks for sharing, Mark. If you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Liberty Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings from more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Liberty Forum, formerly known as the Conservative Forum, and that nomenclature is going to be changing here in coming episodes and months. Now, we appreciate them tremendously because they've been underwriting the show now for 7 seasons, but what they're best known for is their speaker series, which happens at 7 o'clock on the second Tuesday of each month at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Stearland Road here in Mountain View, about 2 or 3 minutes from the studio. In February, Dr. Gary Wolfram, a professor of economics and public policy at Hillsdale College, will be speaking. In March, Ann Coulter, who's a columnist and author. But also, there's a special forum meeting on January 30th where Michael Medved will be speaking, which is also probably going to be very well attended. And maybe people will be offended as well. But you can find out more at theconservativeforum.com, but look for a new website coming in the near future as well. In closing this evening, Mark covered a lot of important topics about the cleanliness of our voter rolls, about us being behind the curve here in California. But I think a lot of people just really don't know what the Secretary of State does or how much of a protector of our constitutional right to vote is out there. We need to have people of strength, of character, who really care about law enforcement, being in place to make sure that your vote counts and my vote counts, because so many people have reached the point of why bother. So research Mark more, as well as just the position in general of the Secretary of State, and I think you'll find that it's one of the under-recognized but potentially most powerful places that we can defend our right to vote and have that count. I've been your host, Chris Pareja. This has been The Right Side, and I've enjoyed being with you on the show this evening. But if you'd like to interact with us, you can reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com, or we hope to see you either in person or on the show sometime soon. Thanks again, and have a great evening.